Okay, week 5 in the books, day 14, I believe. Might have to edit that later. BCA-101, we had a good day. Covered some technology details, and then we covered basics. I mentioned shaming again. I posted it might be a good idea to go back and look at some of those you haven't looked at as students. If you have any work where you did it and there's blank, you let me know. I'll go back through everything. Hopefully we'll have the skills-based assessment on word processing. Hope to have that done I'll have it done by Wednesday for sure. Hopefully Monday by class time. All right. Then, pull quote. People should know what a pull quote is. Students ask me, I just assume you know. And if you don't know, you can look that up. Only take you a minute. Okay, so you have to think about that a little bit. All right, so we're going to talk about this a little more here in a minute when we look at computer details. User interface, user experience. People, I looked up jobs, $50 to $60 an hour. That would be 6 figures, possibly. What that is. So that came out of this here. We're talking about some details here. So let's look at this. On the motherboard, got this motherboard here. We have a processor, we have memory, and then we have this electronic bus that information moves through. It doesn't look exactly like this, but you know, this gives us the idea. And the information moves back and forth. I should have an arrow on the other side of that. Let me do that. Put another arrow there. And information moves through, and we talked about how memory fills up. So, you know, we have an operating system, your software, and your data. When memory fills up, it uses virtual memory to store it here. And then, what's important to remember, again, this is like a turtle compared to this inside here, information moving inside the computer. So when it has to use a lot of virtual memory, the machine slows down. Okay? We have slots in there that you can put things like a video card as an example. Okay? We talked about USB ports, we talked network interface, and that would be right here. We see it out where eventually it's connected to a switch. We briefly talked about output, like a printer, a display. We'll cover a few more details later on. Output's pretty easy. Typically we are printing something, we're looking at it on a screen, or audio, right? Audio, you can listen to your device. Input is way more interesting as we look at this. Input, and that's where we talk about this. Actually, this affects both of these, the output and the input. Okay, what does the user experience? Okay, the interface, how you interface, and your experience. It's become a big part of this. And we talked about just a simple example. We talked about QR, quick reference codes, a little box-looking thing that has all the squiggly stuff in there. And we talked about how you can make those and easily connect to, well, one thing you could put with those is a URL. So somebody needs to get to a website, like I use the example, I'm giving a presentation, I want the people to see my presentation slides or some information that goes with the presentation. I had a QR code on my handout, and they could just scan that, and that would take them to a link that had all the links that they needed for the presentation. Okay, so took them to a website, and that website had everything they needed. Make sense? Yeah, it makes a lot of sense rather than try to type in a URL. Okay, so just to finish up here, I should mention a couple other things. We talked about gigahertz, the clock speed in the computer, the word length inside the processor, and so forth. Alright, talked about then devices, you know, getting to a web server, a printer via the network, and we're going to talk more about some of the network items here on campus. Talk a little bit about Wi-Fi, access point, and connecting to that. Alright, I'm going to keep. So then, we looked at the internet in general. I talked a little bit about backup in the cloud. And we really didn't say too much else about that. I just pretty much was able to use that. Okay. Then, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but let me highlight this. We did a lot in spreadsheets. So, spreadsheets, we talked about VisiCalc on the first spreadsheets, and there was Lotus, and then Excel, so we did a little history. Spreadsheets have labels or numbers, and with numbers, there's a number you typed in or a formula determine the number. This is more important than you would think just looking at it in general. It really is. And so we started doing some work in spreadsheets, some simple work where we would equals, and then we do some type of calculation, and then we talked about absolute and relative addressing. What happens when you have a group of cells and you have a formula in a cell and you copy it down or you copy it to the right? What happens? Okay, when you copy it to the right, relative addressing causes the column letters to change. So you go 4 to the right, whatever the column in here is will change 4 to the right. Relative addressing going down changes the rows numbers. Now if you have a value, let's just say we have a value right here, and we don't want it to change, then we can use absolute addressing. So then when you copy it down, you know, some formula here that gets copied down, it will reference that number and change the other things. Makes way more sense when you see it done in class. Okay? We did the vertical lookup. I'm not going to explain it here, but we did the vertical lookup. We did an if. And the last thing I'll mention, in talking about labels and numbers, I'll use a different color here so you can see. I drew out these bits. Those bits would represent like a 65 in decimal. That's binary. And that's the capital A using the ASCII code. So we talked briefly about how the labels are stored differently than numbers in the computer. And it's really important in spreadsheets how we do that. Well, that's it for today. Thank goodness, huh? Another week, Friday. It's beautiful out. I'm recording on my patio. We'll see everybody Monday.